Welcome to our final lesson in this unit. This is 1.5, the Bronze Age collapse. Our goal today is for you to be able to walk away from these notes being able to describe both the causes and the effects of this event known as the Bronze Age collapse. Before we get started, I want you to imagine or think about a movie or a TV show or a video game that you've watched or played that takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. By that, I mean one in which people are living in a civilization that has collapsed, and people are living using technology that today we would see as inferior, even though the show, movie, video game takes place in the future or even in modern day. A great example of this would be the TV show or video games The Last of Us, where our modern society collapses because of a disease or a fungus that spreads and kills a lot of humanity and makes modern technology just not possible. This is what we're talking about with the Bronze Age collapse. Civilization's life were getting better. Things were getting more complex. Technology was getting better. But then this event happens and it all kind of falls apart. A common way that helps us understand the world is by categorizing things, and historians are no different. We like to categorize the different periods in which people have lived into what we call ages. Now, there's different ways of categorizing periods of time. Real brief right now, we're going to be using the terms Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. As you might imagine, Stone Age is when we use mostly stone, bone, and wood tools. Bronze Age, bronze was the chief technology, and the Iron Age, iron is becoming the most dominant technology of the time. The Stone Age ended in different places at different times, but when cultures learned how to mix tin and copper ore together to create this new metal known as bronze. Once a civilization starts using bronze, we say they're in the Bronze Age. Sometimes civilizations move peacefully and smoothly from one technology age into another, as in the Stone to the Bronze Age, from many places, but not all. And sometimes there is a cataclysmic event that separates the ages. If we look at a timeline here of different cultures we have been talking about or referencing in our lessons, you can see here that something strange is happening in this middle period. Yes, we've talked about the Assyrian Empire as they're an Iron Age empire, but we're kind of backtracking a little bit. Notice what's going on here. There is a giant gap right in the middle here. This is a period that we start to refer to as a dark ages for Greece or other cultures, and many cultures who are in this Bronze Age civilization in the Near East of the Mediterranean, their civilizations all seem to collapse right about the same time. Now, this is what we're going to explore. This is called the Bronze Age collapse. Before we can talk about the collapse of these civilizations, we need to talk about what connected them first. So, the Late Bronze Age is generally referred to as time period about 1500 to 1200 BCE. Sometimes it's called 1500 to 1300 BCE. It really depends on who you're talking to, right? So, by the Late Bronze Age, a lot of people have been developing these massive civilizations in different areas around the world. The most prominent ones that we've been focusing on here are in what we call the area known as the Near East, the eastern half of the Mediterranean Sea, all the way through Mesopotamia. Now, over in Mesopotamia, you can see there's several civilizations like the Middle Babylonian Kingdom, just slightly to the east of them. We have the Elmite Kingdom. We haven't really talked much about them, but they're kind of on the periphery of what we're talking about. But remember, this is where a lot of that tin is coming from over here in this region. There's also a massive civilization, the Egyptian New Kingdom, right here in Egypt. A empire known as the Hittites are taking hold and have really kind of conquered a lot of this area known as Anatolia. There are civilizations popping up over this region known as the Levant. Over here in the west, this is what we call Greece today, but on the southern edge of Greece, in the Peloponnese Peninsula, we see the Mycenaean culture. Over here in the island of Crete, we have the Minoan culture developing, and over here we have an island called Cyprus, this yellow island right here, that's kind of a hub of trade connecting all these different people at this time. It's also a place where there's a lot of bronze workers working at the time, and so it's kind of where a lot of people stop and trade. So you're seeing people all over this region creating their own civilizations, their villages, their cities, farming techniques, gods they're worshiping, governments in order to organize people, their own hierarchies. A lot is happening, and the world is bustling, and technology is getting better, and life is getting better for many. Now, it's important to note that there are other cultures and civilizations forming elsewhere in different continents, but these ones are the ones I want to focus on here because this is where the Bronze Age collapse happens, and these civilizations in particular are heavily interconnected through trade, diplomacy, and culture, creating what we call a loose international system where they're fighting with each other, they're trading with each other, and they're even intermarrying into each other's families, especially on the royal ends, as ways of creating treaties between each other. As mentioned, bronze requires copper and tin, as well as the knowledge of how to make a fire hot enough to melt copper and tin and combine the ore in a proper way with the proper proportions in order to make this bronze. It's not as simple as just throwing tin and copper together, throwing it into a kitchen fire, and then letting them mix. No, no, no. You have to have a temperature that's hot enough to melt them, but then you also need the proper proportion of each. It's not a 50-50 ratio, so it takes a lot of experimentation to figure this out. And those who do, this becomes the peak of human technology. It's used to make everything from armor and weapons to tools for everyday life. Cultures who develop bronze technology have an advantage over those who are still living in the Stone Age. And so once one civilization develops bronze, all the other civilizations and people in the surrounding areas tend to also soon adopt it, otherwise they're left behind. This is one of the patterns we're going to see over and over in history. When one civilization gets a technology first, some technologies give them an advantage over their neighbors, allowing them to conquer and dominate them, resulting in that technology then kind of disseminating across to all these other civilizations. You can see this with modern computer technology, modern car technology. It's happening. AI, it's everywhere. Now, as I mentioned a little earlier, most of this tin comes from out here in the east in what we've known as Afghanistan. So it's further east than Mesopotamia, the region that we've been talking a lot about in previous lessons. So the trade of tin has become the backbone of Bronze Age civilizations. As most of the tin is found over here, copper is found in a lot of different places, but tin mostly comes from here. And so it's got to get through trade routes from this region where it's being mined, through Mesopotamia, all the way through Anatolia, into Egypt, to Cyprus, to the Mycenaean and Minoan cultures. And so tin is really the most important thing for these civilizations. It's like microchips today. Imagine if microchips disappeared, all the technologies we have today would kind of stop working. Tin's the same way, but back in the Bronze Age. So what was the Bronze Age collapse? I'm glad you asked. All these civilizations that are interconnected through marriage, war, trade, treaties, they all kind of crumble and collapse around the same time. I think that timeline I just showed you was that giant gap between civilizations. It's in this crumbling we see major cities are being destroyed all across multiple civilizations in the area. Regions are being abandoned. The elites are losing power. The social hierarchy is kind of crumbling. Powerful central governments disappear from many of these areas for 300 or more years. And so everything just seems to be falling apart during this period. Other consequences, the trade between these regions that completely stops, right? And that cuts off all these areas from the important tin technology. Writing even vanishes in some areas. So cuneiform, which is the dominant way of writing in the Mesopotamian region, it drastically declines in use. Over in what we think of as Greece, that Mycenaean and Crete, Minoan areas, they have two forms of writing known as Linear A and Linear B, and they just completely stop being used. Everyone there becomes illiterate. People just forget how to read and write using that technology, using that written language. In fact, Linear B, we still have no idea how to translate it today. We have scrolls and tablets with this language. We have no idea what it means. Linear A, we've been able to translate, but Linear B, we haven't. So even writing technology disappears from some regions. And because there's no large central governments anymore, coordinating people and getting taxes and making people provide labor as a form of tax, we see these large-scale construction projects of monuments just stopping for centuries. So these stone palaces and statues and all these things, they just stop being made in the archaeological record. Entire regions get abandoned, and in some areas, the cities not just get abandoned, and people just move to cities elsewhere. Instead, they move to smaller farming villages like they did before the Bronze Age. And so you see, life in many ways is going backwards. The way people live, the way they can, the social hierarchies, all these things that were built up over hundreds or thousands of years of progress kind of come crumbling down and people go backwards. Okay, so why did this happen, or how did this happen? There's several different answers. Let's talk about the traditional explanation that people taught for a long time. So I referenced this earlier in our lesson on the first empires. The traditional explanation for what happened was this mysterious sea peoples showed up from somewhere out in the western Mediterranean and start sailing into this region and start attacking all these different cultures and cities across Egypt, down here, Anatolia up here, this region over here of Palestine, the Levant, Syria, and then they just, after attacking, they kind of just disappear and these civilizations crumbled because of it. Most of the evidence for this theory comes from some writings left behind by the ancient Egyptians in the New Kingdom, who reference these sea peoples that showed up and started attacking. There's also some letters from over here in the Hittite Empire and other regions over here that reference these, quote, sea peoples showing up and attacking. However, it's unclear if those letters are from the exact same time period, if they're referencing the same people, and so that makes it a little bit dodgy. In fact, as historians and archaeologists go back and critique this and look for more evidence of these mysterious sea people attacks, they actually found that many of the cities from this time period that get abandoned have shown no signs of battles from the period, meaning there wasn't any evidence of an attack. Not all civilizations that collapsed at this period were ones that have any record of being attacked. It's also unclear if the same people who are attacking the Egyptians are the same people who are attacking the Hittites, are the same people who are attacking in the Levant and Crete and all these other areas. It's also kind of odd that these quote-unquote invaders would attack, destroy entire empires, and then just disappear from history. It seems kind of odd. So historians started to debate and look for other theories and other evidence that could explain this. So hopefully you're starting to think, well, what else could have caused this collapse? So there's some archaeological evidence showing that the climate was naturally changing at this time. It was getting drier in this region, especially over in the Western Mediterranean. And when the climate gets drier, that means it's raining less. This is a period of drought, which means there's less water to grow your crops, which means you're going to have famine. Now, these people in the Western Mediterranean, they don't have enough to eat, and they're looking over to the east potentially, looking at Egypt and Mycenae and the Hittite Empire, and looking at these Bronze Age civilizations and going, hey, those are prosperous areas. We don't have any food here. We should go to where they have food. So this is kind of a reimagining maybe of this sea people's theory of not just necessarily people who are out to destroy these empires, but they start out as, climate refugees. There's also evidence of what we call earthquake storms. So this is when there's a massive earthquake in an area, and then it sets off a bunch of earthquakes over time in the same region. So it's earthquake, then earthquake, then earthquake, then earthquake. And this is happening across this region during the period, damaging many of these cities. And again, the archaeological evidence shows some of these cities weren't attacked. There isn't evidence of arrowheads and swords and dead bodies with wounds, which you tend to find in a city that was destroyed from warfare. Instead, you're seeing walls that kind of just fell over, crushing people, which is what you tend to see when earthquakes happen. And then there's internal revolts, right? The rulers in these cultures were relying on people believing that the gods approved of them being in charge. But the climate is changing. Famine is worsening. People are starving. They're being hit by all these multiple earthquakes around the same time. It's starting to look like the gods are angry. They aren't happy with these rulers. There's evidence of palaces being burned from within, which may be evidence of people turning on those above them in the social hierarchy. And when these climate refugees are showing up at this time, when resources already stretch thin, this can accelerate the revolts. Most likely what happened is this is kind of a chain reaction, right? Any or all of these things happening would have destabilized the trade networks. This would have cut people off from that valuable tin trade that they relied on for bronze technology. And one crisis may have fed to the next one, and since these civilizations were all interconnected, the consequences would be spread through all the connected regions. Okay, so we've gone through this, what caused the Bronze Age collapse, some of the consequences of it, but really, why does all this matter in the first place? Why do you need to learn this, or why should you learn this? Well, first and foremost, the collapse of the tin trade is what leads to the Iron Age, right? This new event with new technology. Without tin to make bronze, we turn to this new mineral, iron, and that becomes the basis of most civilizations. At least the ones that do adopt it early on, they get an advantage over neighboring civilizations that are still using inferior technologies. However, iron is a little harder to work with. It requires hotter temperatures, and that's more technology, right? That's this knowledge of how to create a fire at a hot enough temperature to actually melt the iron ore. But once you achieve this, you have this metal iron that is much stronger than bronze, and it has a lot more uses to it. And the collapse of these older civilizations is going to give space for new ones to rise. As the old song goes, out of the ashes of the old world, we can build a new one. And that's exactly what civilizations did after the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse also shows us that history is not a straight line of progress. Things don't always get better. In fact, sometimes they can get worse. Sometimes history looks like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. which leads into the idea that civilizations are not permanent. The United States, where we live and are taking this class right now, is part of a global civilization, and it seems like this is a very stable and permanent way of being. And the people who lived in the Bronze Age thought the same way. But this is not the case back then, and it's not the case now. The stability of the United States and the global civilization that we take part in can and probably will change. The only questions are, if it happens, when will that be? What will cause it? And what will come after it? This doesn't mean we're headed to a post apocalyptic world where everything's going to go backwards. We know it's happened several times in history, but it doesn't mean it's destined to happen again. But it does give us some warning signs to look for. Because the Bronze Age collapsed, and so our current information age, as we call it, might also. We know that climate change, disruption of international trade routes, mass movements of refugees flying from war, and the negative impacts of climate change are all things that likely contributed to the downfalls of these Bronze Age civilizations. Now, those things also might sound familiar because we know a lot of those things are happening right now. The difference is we have better technology and the lessons from history to learn from if we're willing to learn those lessons. As always, take a moment here to rewrite today's goals. Actually, type it out so that it sticks in your head better. Identify 3 facts from the notes. Again, type them out that you learned that helps you meet this goal. And finally, what is one question you have? Show me that intellectual curiosity. And then after that, hit submit, and we'll see you in class.